Hey everybody, Coach Kyle here with Coach Brandon. We're talking bench press 101. So that's kind of our performance points, our common faults and fixes, the setup that we teach at the Principles of Loaded Movement seminar, and some of our favorite stability and mobility drills. So this is not an exhaustive everything bench tutorial, but it's a great place for you to start or fine tune since you just came on board with us at Kabuki. All right, let's jump right in talking our performance points first. Brandon, we get questions all the time at seminars, so that's where a lot of these come from. Tell me what I need to know about grip and hand placement on the barbell.
Yes, this is obviously the big thing we need to start with, and there's a lot of misconceptions here. I would say the most common fault people have with this is what I'll actually start with, which is making sure we have a neutral stacked joint centrator wrist position. This is a big issue that people have where they lackadaisically quickly grab the barbell, ends up looking something like this, severe wrist extension, and just a very inefficient position to handle load in, not the best place to transfer force optimally. So I always like to put it this way. This is barbell valley. This is where the barbell likes to live. Okay, so when we initially grab the barbell, we should be pushing that barbell to solidify in a position of the meat of the hand, which creates a nice stacked wrist position. So when I'm initially grabbing this barbell, I'm not going to grab it up here by my calluses. This creates an extended position, but instead I'm going to create this hand gesture with my hand, push until I get to the meat of my palm, solidify this position in that valley, and then from here we'll unrack and start bench pressing. That's the first thing we need to do, get it in a good place in our hand, make sure we have a stacked wrist position. Now as far as grip goes, I just want to make sure that the grip I choose is creating, again, nice stacked positions throughout the bench press. For most people, I like starting them a little wider than shoulder width. So if you have no idea where to start, a good place to start typically is pinky on this knurling mark here, but obviously there's a lot of variation. And what will likely happen over time is you'll find the best hand placement for you is dependent upon anatomy, personal strengths, things like that. I have what's called a barely legal bench grip, but there's a lot of variation there that you'll find over time as far as the best position for you.
Assuming if they're just coming on or been with us for a while, most likely your coach is going to have you pressing in a couple different variations as well.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, let's go on to scapular depression versus retraction. Now, this is a very common topic. It goes on and off. Sometimes it's a hot topic. You don't hear about it for a while, but people like to argue back and forth. Should I be retracting my shoulders as much as possible, squeezing them as hard as possible at the top, or should I be depressing them? We're more on the side of scapular depression, but retraction does happen, and it does naturally happen. Turn around and just sit on the bench for me. So what we're talking, if these are new for you, if Brandon's hands are up in a similar-ish bench position, and he squeezes his shoulder blades together as hard as he can. You can even see how his scapula elevated, and he's got these big, strong traps that stick out. It's all squeezing together super tight. The problem with this is, we'll show it at a different angle, you will run out of room, and you will come into scapular elevation and dump the bar, which you then have to correct coming out of the bottom. So, retraction happens, I promise, but what we want is to teach depression of the scapula. And we can even actually have our athlete or yourself elevate your shoulders and then work them straight down for depression. That's where we start. Turn face either sideways or kind of a 45 to the camera for me. And let's get, I like that view, let's get that maximum scapular retraction. Now bring the barbell down. Think about bringing the barbell down. And he'll have to dump and come up for it to get it to touch. Now, notice there's still retraction here. Relax, arms straight out, elevate, depress, and we'll show you when to do this. Now, work depression for me, slowly bringing the bar to your chest. Pause, see how much better that looks, and look what happened. Retraction as well, relax. So, to recap, you do need to retract your scapula, but just like doing a row, it'll naturally happen at the bottom of the bench press if you maintain good stability of the scapula, shoulder blade, with depression. Brandon, let's jump on and talk about bar placement when the bar touches the chest.
Absolutely.
Where should it touch at?
Absolutely. So for this one here, a good general frame, most people should be around the sternum as far as touch point in the bottom, but there's a wide degree of variability here. And the biggest thing that actually varies this specific aspect of the bench press is grip width. So to give you a quick example here, if I am really wide to create the most advantageous positions for me, there's very little elbow tuck and a very high touch point position needed, because our goal as far as where to touch at the bottom is so that if I were to pause your bench press at any given point in the eccentric, if we had it on video and I paused it at any given point, you are always stacked between your elbow, your wrist, and the barbell, creating the most joint centrated positions possible for an optimal bench. So again, if we go with a closer grip, my touch point to create those positions has to be a lot lower on my chest. Wider grip, different elbow tuck mechanics, and a much higher touch point. So the main thing that dictates this is we have to choose the touch point that is ideal for our grip width to create the most stacked joint centrated positions possible throughout the eccentric and of course at the bottom of the press. This right here we don't like, this here we love.
Yeah, that's great. So just to add one thing to that, again, your coach will probably help you with this. Some people think they want a high touch spot or a low touch spot because that's what they've been told. That can change with the same athlete. Now, a different athlete who has a longer upper arm bone might be harder, might be forced into a different position, but like Brandon said, as long as you stay stacked under that barbell, you could touch low or you could touch high. So when in doubt, follow Brandon's recommendations and we'll help fine-tune it as the days and months go on. Foot placement. We see two common types of feet placement. And we really don't care. We might help you find a better one for you. But what we want to cover is, should we be flat on the toes? Should they be out here? Should they be tucked back super far? Some of that might come from your setup, but what generally works for most people, if you don't have a setup that you love yet, and again, we can fine tune this with your coach, is right where Brandon's at. I might actually move him a little farther out and up here. So, and he's maybe not in a perfect position, but you see what we're after here, about a 90-degree angle, shins are flat, it's a wide base, so it gives good stability. The foot's flat on the floor, so when we teach you how to root the foot, there's a lot of foot contact surface to create leg drive and drive in this way. But you don't have to get too contorted. I know you're not warmed up here. Tuck a foot way back for me, and both of them so the camera can see. Some people might even get their feet way back here, under their elbows or shoulders if they're super bendy, and that's okay if it works for you, and you can still have good foot contact. Now we're going from here to, here, so we're losing more than 3/4 of the foot contact, so it might make rooting more challenging, might be a little bit easier to slip depending on the surface that you're on, but we can work with both of these positions. Anything to add to foot basics?
Yeah, basically, if we sacrifice full foot contact to the floor, we'll be able to get our feet further under us. But at the same time, you're going to be sacrificing to some extent your ability to produce leg drive that goes up the chain into the implement. It's kind of pros and cons for each, and some people naturally bias towards one or the other. So a little bit of individuality there, but do understand that if we don't have full foot contact or damn close to it, you're likely not able to produce as much force going into that bar as possible.
Awesome. I like it. Excellent addition. All right, one of your favorites to talk about, using your environment to build that art. So global tension.
This is by far one of my favorites because it's the biggest missing piece in most people's bench press, and it's such a low-hanging fruit. To put this really simply here, we cannot maximize our arch and our position if we do not use our environment. If you're not using your environment right now, you haven't maximized your position, specifically within T-spine extension. Your thoracic spine, which is the upper segment of your spine here, just below the cervical, our thoracic spine is more of a flexion biased portion of our body. To get it to meaningfully extend is pretty damn challenging, which is why when we talk about mobilization before the bench press, we'll cover some specific drills to help you facilitate better T-spine extension. But to maximize in the bench, using your environment is absolutely required. If I just try to extend my thoracic spine as much as possible actively here using just my own body, most of it's lumbar and very little is in the actual T-spine. But if I actually lay down and use my environment, then all of a sudden it becomes much easier to facilitate more. Now there's two predominant ways to use my environment to facilitate more T-spine extension. The first of which is what I personally bias towards, which is using the barbell. So it typically looks like this: row to your barbell, set your glutes, set your feet, and then we push the barbell into the rack to create more T-spine extension.
The second way is what I call the side of the rack shimmy. Grab the sides of the rack and do the same thing. Using our environment to push into more extension and solidify a better position. The one caveat of using this technique is oftentimes we go to grab the barbell, we end up losing it. So when you actually use the barbell to set more T-spine extension, it's a little bit easier to solidify or keep the position you get into.
Yeah, it's awesome. One of the most common faults we see with athletes who grab the rack, they got a nice arch, and they get in there all tight, they've done all this amazing work, and then they let go, and they lose everything they just sacrificed and gained. All right, let's talk bracing for the bench. Now, if you follow this for some time, or if you've already seen some of our other videos, new videos on breathing bracing, you already know some of this, so we'll be quick here. But remember, this is the first time we're talking about losing this neutral rib cage over pelvis position. And we're allowing you as the athlete to open this up into extension, or as much extension as you can globally. Now I say globally because we want you to bend somewhat like this, a nice curve. Now spines aren't built like that. There's a lot more mobility available at the lumbar or cervical region. In this mid upper back, because of ribs, it doesn't bend that much. So that's why we always focus our bias on extension through here, but we're talking global. So some people that have a huge arch through the low back, we might encourage you, especially if you have back pain or problems, to reduce some of that. One of the ways we do so is simply by bracing. So if Brandon lays down, and I'll just have you arch for me somewhat. You don't have to get real tight in there. Grab the bar. Now relax. So we'll show you where to do this in the setup, but first we're going to do is brace through here. The 360 extension is still the same, and then we're going to take a big breath, breathing into that belly, and you can see that rise even more. You have to maintain that while we have constant leg drive through your rep or all of your reps, and that's probably going to be the most challenging thing for you. You go ahead and pop up. Thank you, sir. Because it's hard to maintain that rep after rep after rep. A lot of people will feel it for one, and then they lose it. But again, don't worry, your coach is going to help you with that, and we have plenty of fun drills that will also help. So then, before we get into common faults, Brandon, let's just have a quick conversation about unrack basics and maybe some of the things we see go wrong. We are going to teach the 6-step setup in our bench press to you, but even if you have this perfect setup that we're going to teach, we still see faults come out when we talk about unracking the barbell. Take it over for that quick section.
Yeah, so there's two really big performance points we have to touch on in regards to the unrack. The first of which, the most common that people mess up, is just getting way too far away from the bar. We only need to get far enough away from the rack to clear it and be able to press up. My bench pressing pattern is here, starts in a nice stack position, here to here. So why the hell do we need to unrack any higher than this? We don't, yet we find people very consistently unracking a position where they're way the hell up here. It puts their shoulder girdle at risk. It makes their position deteriorate. It's not good for the press. So this is, for me and for Kyle here, kind of that golden area, kind of the top of the lip to the bottom of the chin. This is where the barbell rack height or rack distance from your shoulder girdle should line up directly above this, and that puts you in a position where you waste less energy, you maintain your position better, and that shoulder girdle ends up being a lot safer in that position, unracking heavier loads. So that's the first big point to bring up here. The second of which is, when we are unracking, we have to understand that rack height very much matters, because when somebody already has complete elbow extension and they go to unrack, so rack height's higher, they always bias towards protraction. Now, even if the rack height's correct, oftentimes we'll still see protraction. So that's the big thing we have to avoid here. At no given point in the bench press should we enter a truly protracted position. There's a little bit of a caveat there, which is that the totality of scapular function in the bench press ideally is we start in depression, we go through some retraction, the eccentric, protract, back to neutral during the concentric, but we never should enter a true protracted position. Definitely not when we're unracking. So we have to make sure our rack height is that of allowing us to start in a little bit of elbow flexion to make our elbow extensors the primary mover to unrack it. 'Cause if we start in a position like this, you'll more than likely bias towards protracting the shoulder and losing position immediately, putting that shoulder girdle in a little less safe or stable of a position.
Awesome. So again, we're going to share our favorite setup with you. Stick with it. Use it. The other thing to say here as we close out with our performance points, with your unrack basics, there's a lot of ways in squat, bench, deadlift, any other movement that we see people mess it up. Kind of like Brandon covered two examples here. We go through all this hard work to have this perfect setup. We bring the bar out, and then we do something with our body to then re-engage. It's like, what's the point of this awesome setup and this awesome unrack to then mess it all up to then go back? Find your key position and stay there. All right, moving on. Let's talk about some of the common faults that we see. One of them is exactly what rolling into it Brandon just said. So go ahead and unrack this, and he's going to aggressively protract the bar and reach the barbell out, and then may or may not fix that. Let's see a good unrack, just so we can see the difference. In case you're doing this and you're not familiar with what we'd rather see, huge difference. Bar didn't go up this high. Awesome. Rack it. So the fault really is losing scapular depression. Here is where the argument comes in. Should I retract as much as possible to avoid that? No, because Brandon already covered the flow of that scapulohumeral rhythm, we call it. So focus on your scapular depression and simply, not joking, but just don't do that, right? That's the fix. Don't pick it up like this. Learn, we have some drills that'll help you with it, but learn to stay depressed and pull the bar out into position. All right, Brandon, let's talk about the fault of losing brace and just not being able to transfer energy from the foot up through the spine, out the barbell.
Absolutely. So a lot of individuals really don't even think about breathing and bracing mechanics in the bench press. Well, it should look like the kind of cadence of cues we should use is I like to, and Kyle does as well, to have complete intra-abdominal pressure creation before we actually unrack, maintaining it as we bring it out, then reinforcing it before we start the eccentric. Because we have to understand that if this trunk is in a soft or not rigid position, the idea that leg drive is going to go up the chain into the implement, not happening. Furthermore, stability is going to suffer and a few other things that we don't want to see. So we really have to make sure that if I'm looking at your bench press as you're going through this movement, I should see a pregnancy belly. I should see really nice inflation, then drawing that ribcage down on that inflation, not caving in. So kind of the difference real quick here is for most people, it looks something like this. If you look at my stomach here, they're sucking in as they go to brace, drawing that belly button in, the exact opposite of what we want. Instead, what we should see is inflating and then drawing that rib cage down to create maximal IEP.
So really the fix of that as well as, well, learn to brace better and don't lose it. And not to sound, again, like we're making cop-outs of saying just don't do that, but learn your breathing and bracing basics and stick with them. There's drills, again, that will help with this. All right, loss of rooting or you never having it. So if Brandon comes down under the bar, and we see this with all kinds of different things, feet slipping and actively moving around. I used to have a tremor in one of my feet. I don't know what it was doing, but I would press heavy. It would literally tap the ground like the movie Happy Feet, right? It would do its own thing. This one was fine. So multiple different faults, but either we're never engaging our feet. So if I walk up and Brandon's relaxed here, he's got a pretty good setup, but if I grab his leg, there's no leg drive and no rooting from the foot. Sit on up for me. So whether you're slipping or you're moving your feet around actively, again, don't do that. Let's drill your rooting basics and keep those feet locked in. Brandon, talk about, this is a good one for you, elbows not staying under the bar or once you're on the way down, moving out from that stacked position.
Absolutely. So there's two primary examples or things I want to cover here. The first of which is elbow should be under the bar when you go to unrack. It's kind of hard from this camera angle to show with a barbell, so I'll just show it here. A lot of individuals, when they go to unrack the bar, they're in this position. They're in a partial range of motion skull crusher position, trying to unrack 400 or 500 pounds. Good luck. Best case scenario, you're still going to waste a ton of energy and likely degrade position. So instead, we need to have that elbow actually under the barbell, nice centrated position, unrack from there, bring it out, depress, all that other good stuff we've talked about. So that's the first thing I want to mention here. The second of which is when we're going through our eccentric, we should have the elbow tuck mechanics too. As I mentioned previously, this is my favorite way to put it, doesn't matter where we pause, we're always staying stacked. A lot of individuals will end up overzealously tucking at the start, looking something like this, and they end up in a position like this in the bottom, rough. That's going to hurt a few different facets of the bench press. So we don't want to over tuck, and we definitely don't want our elbows to go straight out from the start, touch point down here, and then end up dumping at the bottom. That's going to be a very poor position as well.
Yeah, this fault and the next fault will also very commonly lead to elbow and shoulder pain. So it's something you want to avoid even if you don't feel it's affecting your bench press now. And you probably already guessed it by now because we've covered it. The fix is to keep perfectly stacked, like Brandon said, in any position of that press. So once again, don't allow your body to wiggle out of position. This can be a very challenging one for athletes to break. Sometimes they're pretty good and at the bottom they just over tuck here. And we've got plenty of drills, but if this is you, we'll help you fix this and help get you out of some of that shoulder or elbow pain or help you avoid it. So next we're going to talk about dumping the bar. And you can actually stay up and just run through this with me. We see it from multiple places. As the barbell comes down, we can't quite get a touch and our shoulders round forward. We get this heaving action as we drive the bar up. Sometimes that's because the athlete looks at the bar as it comes down or they just lift their head up off the bench. Sometimes it is a mobility issue. Sometimes we do see the athletes not staying big. And what I mean by that is if I have this best global arch I can, I've got that nice belly we talked about, and as I'm bringing the bar down, I just relax that, so another fall of losing the brace, and I have farther to go with my barbell, so then I have to dump to get there. Where if I could have stayed big, we're not going to find that dump. So this is kind of a mixture of common faults here, but ultimately what we're saying is you either need to work on your shoulder mobility if you truly can't get there, and your T-spine mobility, or we need to try harder to keep our head pushing into the bench and our chest, sternum, or belly reaching up to the barbell and maintaining that as the bar comes down. So there's your fix. All right, Brandon. Setup issues, loss of tension, not holding positions.
Yeah, so I would say one of the biggest reasons this happens, there are probably two really common causes here that's worth covering. The first of which is that individuals will create this beautiful, ultra compressed position. They use their environment, facilitate as much T-spine extension as possible, feet under them, they're rooted, everything's going well, and then they bring it out in front of them, they're about to start the eccentric, and they move their feet out. Why? You work so hard to get that position. Why ruin it right before we start the eccentric? They lose tension, and this happens all the time. So that's one reason. Another really common one actually is individuals just not maintaining that stay big cue. A lot of individuals will kind of relax when they have it out. That can cause these issues as well. But I'd actually say one of the biggest reasons this happens is a loss or a fundamental misunderstanding in how we should produce leg drive. A lot of individuals see leg drive as one big burst of energy at the bottom of the press, and that's typically when we see a loss of tension, because ideally leg drive should be a constant endeavor. We should have leg drive on throughout the entirety of the eccentric, but we put a little extra into it starting the concentric, but it's never actually gone, and this helps to facilitate as much stability and tension as possible.
Awesome. One of the next things we see we'll call a broken wrist position. Now, Brandon already talked about this in a performance point. Sometimes you'll see bench pressers bench pressing literally like this, and they'll talk about elbow pain, maybe even shoulder pain on this side, and we'll get a top-down video. That's why I'm staying in this position. And we're like, wait a minute, one thing doesn't look like the other, or they both don't look comfortable. Whether you're wearing wrist wraps or not, hopefully you're not wearing a wrist wrap around your forearm. Hopefully it's actually around your wrist. But this is stacked in a strong position. Brandon already covered it, not here into this broken position because it's simply not strong. So the fix is in your setup, that barbell valley, get it in the right place in your hand before we engage and lock in stacked joints all the way down. All right, let's talk about over retraction and not depressing. So this is kind of coming from that, we've already talked about it, but not staying with long arms and anti-shrugging, getting into that and just retracting and staying up on my traps.
Absolutely, yeah, and there's a lot of fantastic drills we can utilize to actually correct this. Some of them take place prior to bench pressing, motor control drills where we are working against the stimulus to actually depress and learn how to do that. For a lot of new lifters, it's actually a really challenging feat to do. A lot of lifters don't have the best scapular control, so drills can help significantly. Our favorite is a banded R&T scapular depression drill, which we have plenty of videos on online, but basically it's just a drill where bands are pulling your shoulder up into an elevated position. We're working against the stimulus stimulus to facilitate depression. So there's some fantastic drills to help to cue that easier and more consistently.
Awesome. And there's many more faults than this, but here's probably the most common, whatever it was, 8 or 10 that we see with our athletes when we're doing our coaching and coaching updates. The next one we see is, say, like holding the bar with the arms, not being in that good unrack position that Brandon talked about with our elbow extensors. So we're kind of holding it soft. We bring it out soft. It's always kind of a soft start. And if you're doing reps in the gym like this, never really fully locking out and starting soft, it's okay because you're not on the platform. But it's not okay because you're not taking your body through its fullest range of motion. And we miss that top end position a lot, which will cause pain and problems in the pec actually, and we're also not going to get nearly as much pec development. It's one of the other problems with this complete retraction in a dump. We're elongating, softening pec at the bottom, so we're not going to get maximum pec engagement. We find when clients stop holding the bar soft, it might feel a little bit heavier at first, but in the long run, not only do we have healthier pecs and shoulders, we end up with better tricep, pec, and delt development. Not just size, but also strength. Cool. I think that rounds out most of our faults pretty good. Before we show our setup, let's talk about our mobility and movement prep. Do you want to go and grab band and the AccuMobility arch for us? So, it's important to note that a lot of people will talk about warm-ups, right? Or mobility drills and then warm-ups. We like to combine those with called our movement prep. There's purpose behind every single thing that we do. We're not just doing this non-intentfully. We're doing this very intentful. So we're not going to do a lot of reps here, but we'll show Brandon's setup in this AccuMobility arch. We have other ones. This is just our favorite. If you don't have this, a foam roller will work, but not as well. There's other variations. Our purpose here, so you understand why we're doing this, is that T-spine mobility, finding maximum, as Brandon finds the band here, maximum mobility through the T-spine. So we have other drills. This is just our favorite because we use these all the time in the gym. Brandon creates some tension. He's not trying to do a lat pull down here. He's just locking himself in. And he actively curls extension around that AccuRoller. It's going to be a contract relax. So we'll hold that for 8 seconds or so. Back the tension off. Curl back around it again. And work to open that up. Awesome. Popping up for me. Actually, you can stay kind of down there. So we also find it, for most people, very beneficial to open up the hips. Brandon, let's talk the purpose of shin box. Get up. We just opened up T-spine. We're going to take care of shoulders. But why would we want to open up the hips as you walk yourself through the shin box? Get up.
Yeah, so this is actually one of the biggest things that kind of stands us apart within how we coach bench pressing, especially prep forward, is that we always tell our athletes you have to prep your hips as well and just your lower body in general to facilitate the best bench position possible. If we are trying to create the most stable, stacked bench press position possible, get as compressed as possible, that's requiring a lot of mobility out of the hips. So what do we need to do prior? We have to mobilize the hips. For a lot of individuals out there, they're squatting heavy weights the day before the bench primary day. They go to bench press, they don't do anything for the hips and warm up, and then all of a sudden their position suffers, stability suffers, performance suffers. So we have to do some kind of hip mobility prior to bench press to facilitate the best position possible. One of my favorite drills for that is just a simple shin box get up. So when we go through the shin box get up, we're going to start in a nice tall position here. There is one big caveat. If you're somebody that's pitched off to the side like this, you may have to actually elevate the glutes a little bit and shorten the range of motion, as this position, though it looks easy, is pretty hard to get into for some people. We're going to go ahead and start with a little brace, small hinge, and then from here we're going to use this down leg to propel and extend at the hip, solidify a nice tall position. And the most important facet of this movement, I would say, is the eccentric. So as I'm going through the eccentric here, I'm not going to just sit back down. I'm certainly not going to plop down, but instead I'm going to go ahead and go through nice hinge mechanics during the eccentric, pushing these hips back, letting my upper body fall forward, controlling the entirety of range of motion, especially those last few inches, as that's the hardest and most rewarding portion of it to stay in, and then touch glutes, stand back tall, rehinge, come back up, and do repetitions.
Cool. So we talked T-spine mobility. We talked hip mobility. we're going to find some active mobility, and these were already active mobility drills, but active mobility and extra stability through the next couple here. So Brandon, if you get back down on the ground, kettlebell, dumbbell, Q-bell, anything works for this. We're gonna go, armbar. So you've probably seen this before, and again, we won't spend a ton of time. We're saying do this or your bottoms up kettlebell press, which we won't show here just for time, right? Just bottoms up press. But notice how Brandon's not looking at his arm, and it's just movement of the humerus. That's it. Great stability drill, and helps warm up some internal, external rotation. Great flossing of that overall joint. What we see the fault a lot is people just rotating it as far as they can. Maybe they look at it and they're just trying to get as much range of motion. All of that range is coming out of here, not all, majority here and here, not out of the actual shoulder and shoulder girdle. And last but not least, as you hop up there, Brandon, one of our all-time favorite bench press, squat, deadlift, all three of them, movement prep mobility, is shoulder rock swings. So we do have some replacements for you if you don't have a shoulder rock. So it's not a must, but we really like it. One of the reasons, obviously, that we've built the shoulder rock and we utilize it a lot. But Brandon, go ahead and give us a couple swings as we transition to our setup. This stabilizes, it mobilizes, it even strengthens a little bit. And you can even get into one-handed swings and all kinds of other fun stuff. It's just a great way to warm up the entire shoulder capsule before we press. So we would say go through these 4 exercises, 3 to 4 exercises, for about 30 to 45 seconds each. Hit your first set, come back, do round 2, hit your second warm-up set, come back, do round 3, hit your third warm-up set. Weights should already be increasing on the barbell, and you can probably cut these off. You probably don't need to do them anymore. If you're extra tight that day and you want to add a round or 2, that's totally fine. The reason we say time over repetitions is because we find a lot of time if I tell an athlete to do 8 reps, boom, boom, I get it, 8 reps done, because I'm excited, I want to do repetitions. If we're mindful about 30 seconds of the best work of that arm bar I can do, I'm probably going to be more intentful and have better quality. All right, bench press setup. Now, a lot of the faults and problems that we overcame will not happen anymore if you use a quality setup like this and you maintain the positions that you've gained. I'm going to say that again. You maintain the positions that you've gained or earned. If Brandon finds a lot of extra mobility and has this nice arch, but he doesn't maintain that, there's going to be problems. So we've really found at seminars and in person with people that if they just take this setup, a lot of the faults during the actual execution of the lift are gone if they maintain their positions. So step number 1 for us, I'm going to walk through here quickly, and then we'll slow down, show some highlights, so you'll get to see the setup a few times. All right. 7 total steps, maybe 8 if you count the first one. So the first one would be alignment. And I really say that about everything. If the barbell's way over here and Brandon doesn't do a good job aligning that, it's going to be problems. If he doesn't do a good job paying attention to where he puts his hands, there's another alignment. His feet might be in a different position. You start to see what I'm saying here. His position front to back, he talked about it in the setup already. All of this stuff you need to check off. We find people, especially when weights are heavy on top sets, they rush this step, and that's why I spent some extra time on it more than the other ones, because there's a lot of details. Just slow down, make sure everything, front, back, left, right, is good. I like the way Brandon says this. Think about a kid walking across the street. Look left, look right, look left, look right. Just check all of your points before you raise that adrenaline level and start to get after it. All right, so we beat up step 0. Alignment is all checked off the box. Now, his first job, this is different than Brandon's normal setup. His first job is to create T-spine extension, global arch. So he's going to work however he does so to get as much extension through that T-spine as possible. This step, it's also where Brandon gets his elbows underneath the bar. Awesome. Step number 2, scapular depression. So once he's here, he depresses those lats. Not over retraction. This is engaging the lats at the same time. So here is where we brace. Breathe into the brace to finish setting your IAP. Now we're going to root those feet into the floor, create some initial leg drive through us here. This point in time, our global tension from toes up into the barbell should be completed, and the barbell might have already hovered or popped out, and that's okay. If it hasn't, that's when you unrack the bar. So we'll reinforce everything, brace harder, breathe a little bit more, root the feet harder, more leg drive, and then execute. Rack it, because everything else is done. So we walk up to the bar, we have our alignment, check everything. Feet, bar, hands, everything you could think of. Next, we're gonna work to get that global T-spine extension. Once we have that set, our elbows should also be under the barbell. We want to depress scapula, engage lats. We're then going to brace, breathe into the brace. That finishes IAP. We should be rooting at this point in time. Leg drive has happened. That's created global tension or completed it. Once again, barbell might have already popped out. If not, that's your cue to unrack the bar. We're going to reinforce everything. As I'm talking, you can see Brandon lost his brace here, and that's okay because, again, it's a long setup talk. We reinforce brace, breathe back into it, root more, hold those positions, execute. Rest as I talk here a little bit. Now, Brandon's working hard, and I laugh because I've been there plenty of times. If you're not slightly tired from your setup and unrack, maybe 2 reps, you've got more, right? There's some more effort and intention we can put into our setup. This shouldn't be super comfortable. It also shouldn't be super easy if you're really trying hard. So as Brandon catches his breath here, when we go through these steps, alignment, global extension through the T-spine, elbows under the bar, scapular depression via the lats, bracing, breathing into that brace to complete or finish the IAP. Step number 4 is our rooting, our feet creating that leg drive. Global tension should already be there, but we put it as a point. Step number 5, the bar lots of times will come out. If not, that's your cue to unrack the bar. We like to say reinforce everything. And this is my key point as Brandon rests here, is if you could brace harder, that means you probably weren't bracing hard enough for the load that you were lifting. Now, it's always on a scale. Another example is if you can leg drive more or root your feet better, it's not bad. It's just a cue to you as the athlete that you maybe lost it on the unrack or you didn't have it as well as you thought. That's why we just stop, check all positions, reinforce everything, and then last step is simple, execute and stay under the barbell. Let's walk it through one more time and we'll turn it over for Brandon for final thoughts. Go ahead and lie down for me. We're paying attention to our alignment everywhere. Bar, feet, hands, everything you can think of. Now we can start to get a little excited. Turn it up a little bit. Global T-spine extension. Elbows stay under the bar, avoiding all those faults that Brandon talked about. Now we can finally engage lats and get the scapula in the right position. That's taken care of. Let's brace, breathe into it, finishing IAP, root the feet, creates leg drive, global tension's created, bar either popped out or we unrack it. It's out. Let's reinforce everything and execute. And it really is that simple. Even if we're doing it for reps, then we're just executing while maintaining positions. We love this setup. 7 steps, it's methodical. You'll see a lot of similarities if you watch our squat, deadlift. In case you've already watched those, hopefully you're seeing the similarities. Brandon?
You'll notice I'm sweating right now. Doing this correctly kind of sucks, in all honesty. Something that took me a while to figure out is that a optimal bench press position is not a comfortable one. It's a very uncomfortable one. If you're comfortable in your bench press position, you are not doing something optimally. So just keep in mind this is going to be uncomfortable. You're likely going to sweat a little bit. It's likely going to be not the funnest thing you've done, but if you follow this cadence, if you follow this step-by-step process perfectly, you will notice that a lot of faults we talked about will be eliminated and your bench press will get a hell of a lot more efficient, but more importantly, it'll become consistent, which is one of the biggest keys and the biggest thing we're promoting here.
Awesome. Well, that pretty much wraps it up for us. I know we threw a lot at you. This is probably about 40 minutes of content covering your performance points, your faults, your movement prep, and then the actual setup. And simply then at that point in time, I say simple because all the hard work's done, execute the actual lift. So don't worry about remembering all of this. You can go back to this resource video, years down the road and probably take something out of it. These are the key points that we're going to help coach you through. So hopefully you find this video helpful, but don't worry about taking all this and making it perfect. If nothing else, I would say dial in your setup 100%. And don't move on to point 3 if you're not good at point 2, right? Really work through these steps. So if you can't get that scapular depressed, drill that before just saying, oh, I'm just going to sit up here and we'll just brace. This setup has helped so many athletes. That's why I say, if nothing else, take this and run with it. We're here to help, and we're excited to see you get better. Now, go fix your bench.